Well, good Monday morning. It's September the 11th, 2023. This is the day that we remember the crashes of the jet aircraft into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon on 9/11. Ostensibly, now, and I believe by 13 people, mostly Saudi Arabians, a couple others from the Middle East, who flew the planes. I don't for a moment believe that they were able to do that without the assistance at the very highest levels from the U.S. government and the Saudi government. But in any event, we certainly recognize the terrible loss of life that occurred on 9/11, and very sorry about that. But in any event, we have an interesting show for you today, and we have Zuny Tarrio, who is the mother of a Proud Boy, member of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, who just received a just unbelievable sentence of 22 years in confinement for texting with some people who were involved in the demonstrations on January the 6th at the Capitol building. Some of the people actually went into the building. Some of them actually sort of pushed their way and had confrontations with police officers. Many others were just actually welcomed into the building by police, Capitol Police, and that type of thing. And but Enrique Tarrio wasn't even present. He was just sent some text back and forth with some of the people. But I think for a couple of reasons, they liked the idea of trying to throw him in prison just to create a sense of fear and paralysis among anyone who would dare to demonstrate against this administration. So in any event, I would like to welcome the mother of Enrique. She's with us today from Miami, Florida. And also we have the attorney of Enrique Tarrio, and he is Naib Hassan. So Zuny, I'd like to welcome you, and also Naib, welcome. We're very pleased to have both of you, and we're anxious to hear what you have to say about what is obviously an affront to the very notion of justice, the idea that someone gets 22 years in prison for sending texts. Recently, the only comparable thing I can think of is that several weeks ago in Saudi Arabia, there was a man who criticized his government, and he was sentenced to death for doing very much the same thing as Enrique did. I would like to think that we have a better system of justice than Saudi Arabia, but we're certainly tending to move in the direction that they have over there. But in any event, Mrs. Tarrio, welcome to the show. I think you're probably on mute. You're no, I don't believe we're hearing you on the show. So you might, let's see, I see a mute. Let me see if I can. I see a mute button on your screen. You might look to the bottom of your screen. There should be a
yep, there you go.
You got it? Are you on? Well, let's see. No, I'm not quite sure. How about your volume? Is your volume turned up? Jose, have you got any idea? You're the expert.
Senator Black, can you hear me?
Is this Naib speaking?
It is. I just want to confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. I just, I can hear Zuny on my phone. But let's.
Can you hear me?
Jose, are you able to hear? I'm just going to hold my phone here.
Well, Zuny, you gotta hang up with the senator in order for us to hear you on the stream.
Okay, hang on a minute. All right, Zuny, can you speak again? Zuny, are you able to? Can you speak? I just hung up Jose, so.
And she's got to reconnect too. That's the thing. She's got to reconnect in order for us to.
Okay,
right.
so let me
go ahead.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay. It's okay. She's coming back. It'll work this time.
Okay. All right. Naib, as she's getting, well, let's see, she's almost on.
Am I on now? Can you hear me?
On, loud and clear.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
That'll work.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Senator Black. Thank you for having us on today. Today is like a very significant day, September 11th. Horrible day in the past for our country. Terrorism attacks. Those are terrorism attacks. And again, thank you for having us on. We just want to let everyone know that what's happened with my son Enrique Tarrio is a terrible situation. I think everybody agrees. Really, we've lost a lot of a hope for our justice system at this point. We're hoping that going into appeals, justice prevails. And extremely saddened, they've been in there without bail, now convicted by a DC jury and sentenced to 22 years of his life. That's a whole lifetime for him.
Yes, and you mentioned 9/11, and that was a real terrorist attack. Now, as I understand, when your son was sentenced, there was a terrorism enhancement, and as you mentioned, 9/11. We all remember 9/11 with the collapse of the building, with people leaping from the top stories. A lot of people just leapt to their death rather than being burned alive, and it's quite a terrible thing. And what do you think of having that terrorism enhancement that was designed for the 9/11 situation being applied to your son for texting? How does that strike you?
It's just horrific. I mean, when you compare when we went into sentencing that day and the terrorism enhancement was added, it was just the government just pushing forward to something even worse than it already was. So it was terrifying. It's terrifying to think that you raised your son to be a good American citizen, and now he's labeled a terrorist. I mean, where are we going with all of this? How far is the government willing to push this? And it's really hurtful. It's a terrible situation. Again, we're here today, September 11th, and that's terrorism. And our American citizens were not terrorists that day. It's just very simple. They went there for a reason. Things got out of hand. Nobody said that January 6th was a pretty sight. It was not. But for Enrique, for simple texts that were going back and forth, a bunch of guys just talking on text, wanting to meet in DC. It's horrible. It's a horrible. I don't know how much how the government is looking at this, but if we keep following and keep being quiet about all of this is just going to get worse. We hadn't talked till now because we really believed in the system, and the system has failed us.
Yes. Well, Naib, could you explain to us how the terrorism enhancement worked with the final sentence?
Well, basically, and thank you for having me, Senator Black. I greatly appreciate it. We got to have remembrance for what today is on 9/11, Senator. But with that said, I mean, the terrorist enhancement as it applies, it's supposed to apply in very limited circumstances. And the judge made a remark that basically his hands were tied, and we tend not to agree with that. We don't believe that his hands were tied in imposing a terrorist enhancement. What the terrorist enhancement does, it shifts them from a advisory sentencing guideline, which would have been somewhere in the ballpark of 13 years to 16 years, all the way to a potential sentence of 27 years upwards of 33 years. So that's where the government gets at their final destination of their request of 33 years. The guidelines were the final guidelines as determined were in the ballpark of 300 something months all the way to 405 months. But that's based upon the terrorist enhancement. Without that terrorist enhancement, the guidelines would have been much lower.
Okay, so much lower. And now I understand that before January 6th, the members of the Proud Boys, which actually is I think it was an organization that's very patriotic, and they intended to basically provide protection to people who were legitimately protesting in many cases. But in any event, in the course of that, Enrique tore down one of the Black Lives Matter flags. And of course, we're all aware that this BLM Antifa group sort of fostered this massive uprising in the United States that involved the murder of dozens of police officers, the destruction, the wholesale burning and looting of major downtown areas of cities, chasing people through the streets, blocking major highways, and this type of thing. And the Proud Boys, as I understand, their intent was basically to make sure that people were able to go in safety, where they wouldn't be chased through the streets by armed mobs. And of course, you know, different people have different views of this, but I look at these things. I was the chief of the criminal law division for the Army at the Pentagon, responsible for for military justice throughout the world, and at the time, we took a very balanced view towards things, and we didn't use justice as a system of retribution. Now we would certainly be very harsh with people who committed violent murders and terrible rapes and things of that sort. I was personally responsible for all of Department of Defense's capital punishment cases. We had about a dozen at the time. And so, I was known as a very stern disciplinarian, but I've always been very concerned about America's drift towards using the judicial power as a means of suppressing free speech or freedom of religion. And I've seen this increase over the decades to where now it's reached quite an extreme. Tell me, Zuny, if you could, tell us a little about your son, Enrique. What was he like? What kind of a young man was he?
Enrique has always liked politics and history a lot. So he's always been trying to get very involved with his community and, try to make, his patriotism, shine all the time. And when we talked about these other incidents where there was cities destroyed and people followed, and whole cities boarded up, that's really sad. And what happened on January 6th is also sad. But you need to sentence, and you have to convict and sentence people for actually what they did, not over sentence, over incriminate. Enrique wasn't there that day. Like I said, he has always been a very good patriot, always a quiet person trying to do the best for his country and for his community. So for him to be sentenced to 22 years is really, it's a terrible situation. And, the way that other countries see this is that, we're prosecuting, sentencing, convicting our own people for freedom of speech. If you tore down a fence and you get, sentenced for that, well, then you should get what you need to get, not over convict, and not over sentence. So it's not, this is a terrible situation for a patriot like Enrique. It really is. And it's really hurtful.
Yes, I can imagine. I don't know that most Americans are even aware, but there were hundreds of thousands of demonstrators who went to the Capitol on January 6th. The majority didn't even go to the Capitol building, but they went to Washington to demonstrate. And since then, there have been over 1,100 Republicans who have been arrested and charged for the January 6th demonstrations at the Capitol. I say Republicans because I assume that 99% of them were Republican. The rest were probably FBI agents, undercover provocateurs, and things trying to stir up trouble. And there certainly were some people that are strongly suspected by many people of having actually instigated whatever violence there was. We ended up having one single person who was deliberately killed, and that was a Trump protester who was gunned down by a Capitol police officer under circumstances that I would have found most difficult to defend. If I were defending a member of the military who had shot an unarmed individual who was actually kind of in a helpless posture. She was squeezing through a broken window. And had I been defending somebody like that, I'd have said, boy, we better take a plea, because that's you can't do that. You just can't. But in any event, apparently this fellow was exonerated. But in any event, they keep casting around saying, well, so many people were killed in this demonstration. There were some people who died, because there were a lot of elderly people who came, and some of them just passed away during the demonstration. One person was trampled, but there was only one deliberate killing, and that was by the Capitol Police. Not a single member, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand, not a single person who was within the Capitol itself was found to be armed. And is that correct, or am I wrong? Don't hesitate to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if Attorney Naive is aware of exactly what that. But just to let you know, there was thousands of people there, and I think 1,200 maybe have been prosecuted and indicted. So that's a very little amount for thousands of people that were there. And out of those 1,000 people, that or 1,200 people that were arrested, only one is doing 22 years. The one that wasn't there, the one that only wanted to be there to support his president. So we really need to take a look at this. We've been quiet till now, but the American people cannot continue to be quiet about this situation. We need to speak out. We need to raise awareness of this situation. Again, the Department of Justice has been given all the weapons to do all of this, and they're continuing to give them the weapon. We need to stop. We need to analyze every one of these cases. Obviously, we're going to appeal. And, like Attorney Hassan said, I mean, it was that terrorism enhancement last minute thing that they added on there. They were just putting things out there to see what stick. And unfortunately for us, our judge, agreed to that.
Yes. It's interesting. And this is not the judge who handled the case involved here, but NPR ran an article, and they discussed some of the comments by various judges there in DC. And this is a quote from one that it really suggests a certain predisposition or bias on the part of some of the judges. And this is just one example. There's a quote from Judge Walton, he was in charge of one of these trials. Quote, Judge Walton said that January 6th brought to mind Nazi Germany when he said, quote, a very educated, intelligent population was able to be swayed to engage in the atrocities based upon a demagogue. Obviously, he was referring to Adolf Hitler. Judge Walton went on to say that if the rioters had their way, you would have made this country, in a sense, a dictatorship. Now, I see those comments as very histrionic, very extreme, grotesquely exaggerated. The idea of comparing Donald Trump's remarks to those of Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust, when the judge referred to atrocities, I don't know what he's talking about. There were no atrocities committed on January the 6th, unless you wanted to say perhaps the death of that one Trump protester. But other than that, I mean, you had some people doing some things they shouldn't have done, that they pepper sprayed some of the police officers and that kind of thing. There certainly was some very rowdy behavior. But it's important for listeners to remember what President Trump actually said. Here's a quote from Donald Trump. Quote, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard, end quote. Now, to compare that with the rantings of Adolf Hitler, you just come away thinking, what sort of justice? I will tell you this right off. Had a military judge during my time, now I retired back in '94 from the Pentagon, but had a military judge made a comment like that, and this again was not one in your son's trial, but it was one of the January 6th trials. But had a judge said something like that, that case would have been thrown out, because it would have just shown a lack of judicial decorum to make a statement like that. So I found it surprising to run across that. But what do you think? Have you ever reflected, Zuny, on you've seen what happened with all of the nationwide, what essentially was a kind of a revolution by BLM, Antifa, and all of their followers, and people being murdered and so forth. And courthouses being taken over, police stations being burst into and seized. And I don't recall seeing any major sentences for any of those crimes. Now, perhaps with some of the murders of the police officers, I suspect there were some prosecution, but basically the other ones, everybody seemed to walk, was my impression. What do you?
And that's absolutely correct. And I think a lot of those demonstrations, a lot of those situations that happened with Antifa and other organizations may not have happened that strongly in DC. And maybe that's why it wasn't taken. I heard a lot of, now that you brought up history, during our trial and at sentencing itself, I heard a lot of talk about history and the future of our country in reference to what happened on January 6th. And honestly, the history that's going to be written with these trials in the future in history books and everything else, it's, is not going to be a good one. And it's not going to be good because it hasn't been fair. We asked for a venue, change of venue in several occasions, and we were denied that. We had no real chance. So the history for the future, when it comes to these trials and everyone involved in them, is not going to be something that we really want to talk about in the future. And about things like this happening, people have a right. People have a right to go out and protest peacefully. And January 6th wasn't the most peaceful, but I think it turned like that for a lot of other reasons that will be coming out in the future. And again, I don't see that as a good American history. I mean, we're not being seen in the world like some people thought on January 6th. Well, the world has seen us like we're not a country that's strong, and people are protesting like they do in many other countries. But now what's happening is that the following of these American men, the persecution of these American men, are really hurting our history, our future, and how we look in the eyes of the rest of the world.
You know, the First Amendment right to petition one's government and to protest in the course of that. I think traditionally throughout American history that has been interpreted to provide some latitude, because when people are protesting, they tend to be angry, excited, and so forth, and so there's a little bit of leeway given so that people are able to demonstrate, and every little infraction is not seized upon. So we're taking that and we're just turning it inside out. And here, I'm curious, why did your son not go? Why didn't he go to Washington during that demonstration?
He did not go because he had a pending warrant for the Black Lives Matter situation, and he was told to stay out of DC on that, to leave DC and stay out of DC.
Okay,
Senator Black, if I can piggyback on that comment,
please.
there were requests by him to speak on January 6th in locations that were accessible to the public on January 6th. That information was provided through a defense case over to the jury. And he had the right full to protest. However, he abided by the conditions that were imposed by the court and those that were imposed by him as a result of the warrant that was assessed on that were imposed upon him on January 5th in the morning. And he left the jurisdiction as ordered by the court. So he followed the court's order.
So now this is interesting. So, the media have tried to portray him as a general leading some massive thing, a general who felt like he was going to overthrow the government. Doesn't sound to me like a guy who would obey the lawful orders of a court to remain away. and he did as they said. Even though perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if he felt like he had a First Amendment right to be there and to protest, but whether he did or not, he obeyed the law. He was not present, and he was very interested in what was going on, as everybody was at the time. And so he texted. But it's interesting that he obeyed court orders, and he didn't say, well, I don't care what the law says, I'm gonna violate the law. Here was a law-abiding guy who was not willing to violate law. As you look at the BLM protesters who were out there, they broke laws right and left. They assaulted people. They blockaded the highways. There was a case in Fredericksburg where some poor woman and her child were caught up, and the BLM protesters jumped on her car. They were stomping on it. They were trying to break out her windows. Her baby was screaming and crying, and I don't know that anybody was ever prosecuted for that. You know, the woman feared for her life, but then you get Enrique who did nothing but obey the order of a court to do as he was instructed, and he ends up in prison for 22 years. Zuny, I think we've lost your audio.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Okay, back. You're back.
Senator Black, I'm glad that you brought that up. Enrique has always been very, law enforcement. He's always respected them very, very much. Every time they'd go to an event, he'd meet up. He'd advise that they were going, where they were going to be, what time, everything else. And this was no different. This was no different. January 6th was no different. They were advised that, that they were coming. There's proof of that. And like you said, if he's labeled a general, I don't think he would have stayed out of what he supposedly was trying to put together or anything like that. So I do respect your opinion on that, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And he wouldn't have stayed out of the jurisdiction of DC if this was something that was supposed to be happening and, was a planned situation, which it was not. We all know that. There was no real evidence of that in the trial.
Yeah, I really don't see any evidence that anyone intended to overthrow the government of the United States. What I see was people who were deeply concerned that there were other people who were overthrowing the government of the United States by the way that they conducted the election in certain places. And you can disagree with that, and certainly many people do disagree with it, but the idea that it's illegitimate to think that that it was unreasonable to question the legitimacy of this election. Honestly, Al Gore contested the legitimacy of his loss to George Bush, which he had a right to. He had a right to do it, and then there's the Stacey Abrams, I believe, in Georgia. To this very day, when she gets up and speaks, she said that that the Republican governor was not duly elected, and she doesn't recognize the election. Well, it's her right to believe that, and it's her right to say it. And
exactly.
If we get to the point where somebody who loses an election cannot point out irregularities with that election, we are gone. I mean, there's no way that you can have legitimate elections unless you have two sides who argue their points, and that's that's the way the system works, and the system cannot work unless you have people on both sides able to point out defects with the other side's arguments.
And that's where that's why we have decided to start speaking now. We have an appeal coming up. I usually call this the appeal of the appeals. And the reason for that is because Enrique Tarrio, again, is the only person that's been sentenced to 22 years without being in a location, which we don't know what would have happened if he was. Maybe things would have been better and more controlled. But right now, our family is asking for help with the appeals. We didn't ask for it in the trial, but we're asking now, Senator Black, because this has made a lot of families financially hurt, including ours. And we really need the help to make this appeal happen the best way possible in DC. And we'd like to call out to the American people and say, please help. We need to help with this. We need voices. We need to win this appeal. We need help with the appeal.
Yes.
And it's TarrioFamilyFunds.org. Again, it's TarrioFamilyFunds.org. We really need the help. This is not only for Enrique Tarrio. This is for the entire country and every American citizen that has the right to protest, to talk, to text, to do a podcast. This is something very serious. We need to take this very serious for the future and for the history as it was said in court.
Yes, and you said TarrioFamilyFunds.org,
That's correct.
and that's TARRIO, TarrioFamilyFunds.org.
Right.
I certainly encourage watchers to contribute and to disseminate that information to other people, because part of the plan that I believe is orchestrated out of the Department of Justice is to bankrupt Republican activists, bog them down in order to make sure that it diminishes the force of the opposing party during the presidential election. As we mentioned before, Donald Trump was the 45th president, and in over 230 years, almost 240 years, not a single president had ever been indicted until Donald Trump. And then he underwent two really flaky impeachment proceedings, one of which he never even had an opportunity to put on a defense. Both of them were thrown out by the Senate, so he was acquitted. But then they very carefully orchestrated 4 different indictments in different parts of the country, all scheduled to take place right at the moment that the presidential election is kicking off. And at the same time, you look at these 1,100 Republican activists who were at the January 6th, who have been arrested, who have been charged, many of them imprisoned. And people don't realize that the Department of Justice is arresting 5 Republicans every week and charging them. And I've seen this right here in Northern Virginia with the school board situation, where the Department of Justice and the FBI ended up flying helicopters over some of the school board meetings to intimidate the parents so that they would stop protesting so vigorously against some of the obscene policies that are being adopted in the schools. So this is an orchestrated campaign by the Biden administration, out of the White House, out of the Department of Justice, out of the FBI. The purpose of it is to suppress political opposition. And well, this morning there was some Democrat on the news who was saying that he thought that Trump should die in prison. For what? For saying that people should peacefully demonstrate at the Capitol. I think it's obscene. And I will point out, something that also has happened here in Virginia is that Governor Youngkin, after careful examination, granted an absolute pardon to a father whose daughter was raped at school by a transgendered boy who was wearing a dress, went in, raped her, and I happened to be present. I gave the major speech at the event that blew the lid off of the school board meeting here in Loudoun County, and I remember Scott Smith, the father. He was sitting there quietly, peacefully, filled with anger that lies were being told about how things were handled with his daughter, and then there were BLM, Antifa, transgender people. They were all in a group together, and they came and they sat behind him and they began heckling him because they knew that his daughter had been raped, and so they heckled him to needle him. And at a certain point, he just blew his stack and jumped up and started yelling at them. And one thing led to another. He ended up being arrested for something that was not his fault. It was the fault of these provocateurs behind him. They had gone there solely for the purpose. They knew if they could provoke a father whose daughter had been raped on the stool of a bathroom in a public school, that they would get him angry and he'd blow up, and then they could make a big to-do about it. This is similar to the way that the Democrats are operating all through this country these days. They're very much like the brown shirts under the Nazis or the Bolsheviks under the communists. And they've become quite a danger to the American Republic. So I really urge people to assist with the appeal, with funding the appeal. And if you would just repeat that address once again, Zuny.
Yes, it's TarrioFamilyFund.org. And Senator Black, I can really relate to that father, because when you sit in a courtroom and listen to lies after lies, and the government pushing for and just keeps sending the same videos over and over, where your son is not even in any one single video, it's really hurtful. It really hurts. I begged our judge for leniency for my son. We sent lots of letters, letting every single person, letting the judge know who Enrique Tarrio is. It's really hard to picture somebody trying to sentence somebody that you really don't know, and you're just looking at video after video and just trying to, he tried to do his job, but it really hurt everyone. It hurt this country for Enrique to be sentenced to 22 years. It has. And now we need the help for the appeal. Again, it's TarrioFamilyFund.org, and we appreciate all the help for all of us.
Okay, again, Tarrio Family Fund, that's singular, .org.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and we've got that shown on the screen right now.
Okay.
In any event, I think we've sort of run out of time. Attorney Naib Hassan, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I want to thank you for the work that you've done on this case. And Mrs. Tarrio, our prayers go out for you. We know how difficult it is when you have anyone who has a child who is imprisoned, but it is particularly difficult when your son has been done such an obvious injustice. The notion, you think of how many of us have carelessly shot off a text to some friend and say, we ought to do this, we ought to do that. I mean, if you were to imprison people for sending texts to friends,
Expressing
making
your opinion.
comments. I mean, if half of us wouldn't be in prison today, I would be absolutely amazed.
Absolutely.
So,
But Senator Black, we've lost our faith a little bit in the judicial system. Hopefully, we can recover it during appeal. But we haven't lost our faith in God. So we do appreciate all the prayers that come our way. It certainly gives us a lot of strength and hope, and we will not lose our faith and our hope, no matter what happens.
amen to that. I mean, God is there. We pray that our Savior Jesus Christ will be looking over us, and the Holy Spirit will move this country to return to Him and to return to truth and to actual justice, and to renounce all of this corrupt environment of political retribution through the courts. So in any event, many thanks to you, Zuny, and Naib, to you also for appearing today. We wish you all the best. We hope that at some point that all of these convictions will be carefully reviewed by another administration to examine whether some of these people should not be pardoned or their sentences commuted. And who knows what the results will be once those examinations are done, but I would be quite surprised if there are not a lot of them where there is not a complete pardon, or at least some sort of lessening of the penalties. So in any event, thank you very much.
Black, thank you, Attorney Hassan, for being on with me.
Thank you, Senator Black. Much appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
This has been Focus on the News. Very special guest today, and you can always reach us. You can always locate our show. Just put in Twitter at SEN Richard Black, and we appreciate you listening to us, and we will see you next Monday.
Thank you.